Welcome back out to the greenhouse with me. We're gonna head inside. I got a few things going on. We've got a decent little snowstorm coming down on us here, and we've got decent temperatures. I haven't lit the actual fire in the greenhouse yet. Had to clear the snow off the camera there. We're sitting about 55 degrees or so, 54 degrees down on the end of the greenhouse with the least amount of insulation. So this being in the little bit of sunlight we got, which is kind of going through snow and clouds, so it's not super potent, is able to warm that up a bit. But when I came out here about 20-30 minutes, we were sitting decent temperatures. This side is 50 degrees. We have that little bit of sun coming through. You can hear just how loud those fans are running. They're running very well. So I've got this copper done. I wrapped it all up around my whole stove. I got the inlet and outlet feeding down just along the ground here. So I got a pump. I stole the energy from my actual solar system that's running my Jean Pain, so I just kind of hooked those up. We'll click that on. So while we're waiting for the water to start flowing, it's actually flowing now. Got a decent flow coming out of there. That is awesome. So we downsized our PEX to some small copper, so I can basically run my copper around there, heat it up, and then our copper will basically go up this large tank. I ended up filling this tank up with water because the fittings weren't very solid. They weren't actually in there, so just a recycled steel tank full of water. Got it nice and level, so I got maybe like 30-40 gallons of water that I'm going to be able to heat up with this coil, and then it just basically dumps back in. So basically just adding on to all of my heat retention. So once this water starts heating up after I light this fire, I want to get some temperatures here. Just kind of wanted to walk out here and check this out real quick. As I was getting everything done and situated, I wanted to show everybody before I lit the fire. It's sitting 50 degrees in the greenhouse, and we're sitting about 11 o'clock right now. So the sun is starting to break up those clouds that are snowing on us. So hopefully we can get some good sunlight and raise the temps a lot, because we're just trying to get as much thermal mass warmed up before nighttime. We're sitting about 20 degrees outside right now, and everything is melting off the outside of the greenhouse because it's actually warm in here, and that second layer is definitely transferring to that poly. I'm always pretty amazed when I can come inside and it's nice and warm, and we're just running geothermal and some Jean Pain heating, blowing about 70 degrees out of our actual drain tile there that is heating from compost. I had to get my coat off. I'm actually pretty warm in here. It's pretty darn nice to be able to come out here. I'm gonna run around the side of the greenhouse real quick. Everything is basically melting off of this, but it's dang cold outside. You can see how everything started melting off. I just lit my fire. I really enjoy being able to multi-purpose the heating and the heat sinking in the greenhouse with all of those bricks, all of the extra water, and all the little projects and solar power. We don't have any electricity hooked up out here, no hard lines. We're just running off of solar power, and you can see that snow's real thick and heavy straight up top because it's got really nothing to make it slide. Once that poly gets a little warmed up from the inside layer or from the sun, that snow just starts to slide right off. So we've got our fire just starting up, got all the starting wood in there, and I wanted to talk about that real quick. I've been using those little scrap pieces, and I got all of these from a local supply store. They had a whole bunch of free stuff, basically all these offcuts and all this kind of crap. I mean, this could be used for something, but basically it's all just waste to them. It's going to go in a dumpster. So I picked all this up for free, and this is all just free kindling or basically some solid wood there. But for the most part, I can use all of this as a stockpile to start the fire, get it nice and hot where I have coals underneath, and then I can start filling and backfilling all of my wood chips on top, because that just burns for a decent amount of time. I'm actually quite surprised. I can get a coal to stay in the bottom of this for like an hour and a half, and I haven't filled it all the way up yet. The highest temp I've seen on the stack so far is like 900 degrees. And speaking of the temperature, our little thermometer here, all the paint melted right off or just basically disappeared. You can kind of see it at an angle, but so that's not really very impressive that all of the paint just wiped right off and you can't even see what the temp is now. So this is getting, yeah, it's rocking now. So we got some good heat that's going to come out of there. Our fan should kick on in a second here, and we're basically just going to heat this stack up as much as possible and transfer that heat to the water that is running around. The water of the tank is about 42, so that's probably about what it was on the floor maybe 6 to 8 inches down in the floor. So it was about 42 degrees in the soil overnight, because that's about what this will stay. It'll basically just pick up all that negative draw from the soil and from the ground. And that's why we're trying so hard to heat the water up so we can have a better thermal mass to start with. I can hear this fire roaring here. That's pretty darn cool. So the top plate's starting to warm up. Down towards the edge, it's not very warm yet. Not warm enough to kick the fan on there, but yeah, that stack is going to be warming up pretty dang good. We should be cranking some warmer water out here pretty darn soon. So we're blowing about 48, 47 degrees. This actual piece of copper is going to be the same temp pretty much. So that's just within the first minute or two of actually starting this. It's actually throwing warmer water into that copper coil, and it's transferring it around and back into our overflow tank. Our little fan is starting to kick on. The temperature is about 100 degrees. So this kicks on about 80, 85 degrees. And it gets really cranking about 200 degrees or so, maybe 300 degrees. So it puts out some decent airflow. Once we've got this actually warmed up, there really isn't a whole big need for the fire right now, because it's 50 degrees in here on its own. But overnight temps, we might get down to the single digits tonight. So I really wanted to throw a bunch of energy into this thermal mass and basically just sink everything I possibly can in. I showed our little cold air intake in the last video, and it definitely works well. I've noticed how much draw that was actually coming from our doors and down at the other end. Getting that problem fixed certainly helps us hold a lot more heat in the greenhouse. We are not sucking air like a vacuum through the door. We are basically just controlling that feed of oxygen into the fire, so it's not having to draw it from anywhere but the source that we gave. So let's jump back over and see, after like 2-3 minutes, what kind of water we are pushing out now. So we went from 48 to 57, 58. We got about 10 degrees in about 2 minutes. So we got about 10 degrees transfer after 2 minutes. So we didn't have a whole lot, maybe 5 degrees after a minute. And after first 2-3 minutes, we are holding about 10 degrees more. I'm going to continue to update on this because I'm very interested to see what kind of heat this can put out. So this little eco fan really piques my interest too. It's holding about 120 degrees on the back side here, so 115, 135. So those actual fins that are behind the fan to draw more heat up to be blown around, they are working very well. I'm really impressed with this, and it's moving and dispersing a lot of heat. I can feel it at least 5 feet back, blowing the heat out. So that's the whole goal, is to basically fluctuate the air from one side to the other and basically hold a bunch of heat in our heat sinks here. So I was picking up about 68 degrees average, so we've got another 10 degrees of transfer. We went from 48 to 58 to about 68 degrees, and that's all in a matter of 5 to 10 minutes here. So we've had 5 to 10 minutes of run time on our actual furnace being on, or wood burner burning. So we've transferred some good energy to that. So this is just really a large experiment for me. This is going to transfer a lot of energy into this tank here. Can feel the hose is warmer than the actual tank. I just got this tank filled up. That was quite the feat in the middle of winter to run a hose out here. I had to thaw the hose out inside the greenhouse while it ran, and then shot a whole bunch of ice into the tank through the hose because it's so darn cold out. So I got this filled up nonetheless by any means necessary. So I'm really taking a lot of really cold water, at least 40 degree groundwater, 42 degrees, and I'm basically trying to heat it up with this extra water. So the tank will be pulling a lot of thermal energy. So I guess this isn't the best example of an experiment. It feels decently warm, a lot warmer than the actual water of the tank there. So we are doing something. I think we're just having to transfer a lot of energy into this tank before it's actually dumping in. But we're going to be raising the temperature of the water that will be shooting into our Jean Pain system. So we'll just kind of amplify that. We were putting about 80 some degrees through that on its own on a really sunny day where the actual solar system had a lot of juice to run. This is probably the worst time to actually film this because we don't have a whole lot of solar activity. The sun is very, very weak today, and got a lot of snow coming around. That water is getting warmer and warmer. Pretty darn cool. So we're going to check back in after about a half an hour or so to see what kind of temps we're putting into that water. Here we are about half an hour later after we started this fire. greenhouse is sitting about 85 degrees on this end. I want to run down to the middle here and see what we're holding in the middle of the greenhouse. I can see we're holding a cool 70, 65, 70 degrees, just under 70. Between 65 and 70 there, that's not too bad. That's actually a decent temperature for the middle of the greenhouse for a hot greenhouse. Ours is just a DIY heated greenhouse, so that's a pretty darn good temperature for the middle. So we're down by our door here, and this thing is sitting a solid 60 degrees there, right around 60 degrees. So that is a warm greenhouse. It is 20 degrees outside, it may be 20 degrees outside, and we've had a bunch of snow and little to no solar activity today. So we're just running off everything we've got in the greenhouse, and that is the whole purpose of everything I'm doing. Feel the heat coming off of this. So our stack's sitting about 740. That's a really hot stack there, catching all that heat, transferring it into there. Let's check the temps on here. Those temps were kind of bouncing around there. We're putting maybe about 75, 80 degrees into this tank. It physically feels warm. So that's pretty darn cool. This water is at least 75 to 80 degrees, and it is darn warm. I can see it steaming and stuff in certain spots. That's pretty darn cool to have some warm water to basically thermal sink this whole 110 or 120 gallon tank here. So we're pushing maybe a gallon, a little over a gallon per minute, because I had downsized from our PEX to just a 3/8 copper tube here. So downsizing it drastically slowed the flow, and I wanted to slow the flow down, and I didn't want to go much smaller than 3/8 copper tubing here. So we ran with that. It's nice and malleable, but it's nice and strong at the same time. You can basically bend it to wherever you want it, but it holds its own shape. So if we're blowing about a gallon a minute through here, we're going to be able to reheat this tank in maybe 2 hours, because we're blowing about 60 or so gallons per hour. If I can refill this whole tank with water one time and basically cycle the amount of the whole tank through this furnace, I can basically raise the temperature a couple degrees, maybe 10 degrees, maybe 20 degrees, or maybe even more. I'm just basically going to see how well this works, and then once this is the ambient temperature of the greenhouse, I will do a nice little study on this and kind of find how well I can heat that up after a whole day of thermal heat sinking. I really thought about buying some sand and just putting a funnel up here and making a sand battery out of this, and it's still not too bad of an idea. I can slip it out of this copper coil and basically empty it out and fill it back up with sand in the same place. I don't know how feasible that is. I'd have to really get some dry sand, but for the most part, this water is going to hold a decent thermal mass also. So I really wanted to use this nice thick steel tank to double up on all of this systems, as opposed to just running it through and then dumping it back into this large tank. I wanted to add another 30-40 gallons of water or heat to the actual system here before it dumped that warmer water back into the actual overflow for our Jean Pain and all that stuff. It's certainly getting warm in here. That thing is registering almost 90 degrees up there. It's pretty darn cool to be able to have that stove. The entire airspace is heated up, and we're recycling all of that air. Our geothermals keeping some good airflow on all of these. These have grown significantly. We've got decent growth on everything by our geothermal here, and it doesn't look like much, but having all of this life when there is no greenery outside, we've just got a snow-filled wasteland, it looks like. So I always enjoy being able to come out. We are definitely sliding more snow off the top of this. I just heard a huge chunk of snow slide down, so that is amazing. We are definitely heating up in between those second layers and allowing this greenhouse to actually warm up a lot better. That layer of dead air outside this first layer of poly is really buffering all those cold temperatures. Last winter, the snow wouldn't slide off of this greenhouse no matter what we did, even if we had our Jean Pain heating going on inside the greenhouse with the compost piles inside. We didn't really see the snow sliding off last winter at all, because it was basically just stuck, and we had ice on the inside. We haven't had ice frost up on the inside of this. Even when we had that polar vortex, we've just got nothing but condensation. It's just moisture, and all of that's just kind of getting blown around too. So it's a good environment for the plants now that we've got a little better circulation of the heat and kind of ventilating all of that to the entire greenhouse. I still want to add our little solar fans here. I'm going to rig them up to basically run off that. So I will have all of my fans running off those 2 batteries and the same system, along with our little heat dispersal fan, which requires no energy. It's actually warming my hand up pretty darn good. That is amazing. That is a very handy little tool to have. This has been very interesting to me. That's why I keep adding on all these systems, trying to really procure all of that heat that I possibly can from one heat source or the other. Our free system, and this is basically a free system too, all one-time investments. I'm not continually having to pay for wood chips or fuel basically, so all of this fuel is free. Just had to basically invest the money one time to have all of these systems running, and with the solar power there's no bills out here, no fuel, no gas burn. Pairing all these systems together and possibly heating up my Jean Pain water a little bit more is going to certainly benefit everything in the greenhouse, because all that warmer water is going to have a easier time heating up in the Jean Pain system and then basically flowing through the entire greenhouse to put some heat to the floor. We've got some really cold temperatures coming, so I'm going to cover our rows up tonight. I really try and leave those uncovered all day if I possibly can, so it's a little bit more tedious in the winter time coming out to the greenhouse, but having all these experiments running is the reason I'm out here. So I'm out here more and more when I'm working and checking on everything and getting stuff set up and basically adding some more free heat. So we're going to be adding a major thermal mass system. Basically all of this is going to radiate heat now, as opposed to just having the actual stove and stuff, and all of our compost air is always blowing out and circulating all of this hot air from this end down too. We've got a pretty decent system running here with all of our little systems together. We're able to achieve growing temperatures for basically free. One-time investments is all that we do, is just to try and get all of this to be as efficient or self-sufficient as possible. So heat sinking everything we possibly can is the name of the game. You either have to heat your greenhouse constantly or you have to provide very good insulation, so we try to do the best of both worlds. And it's not always easy to insulate a hoop house. You want to have a double gap, basically a layer of air in between, whether you blow it from inside the greenhouse or just have a layer of dead air up. It is going to provide a lot more insulation having that dead air sitting there than anything else. When we had this thing just as a single layer, we were shedding so much heat throughout the whole greenhouse when we were compost heating and stuff like that. We weren't really providing much heat to the plants at all. We were basically just heating this airspace, and it was getting sucked right out as it was basically brushing upon the walls. So having all of these successful heating systems, I can hear that snow just shuffling right off the sides of the greenhouse as it warms up. We're still sitting almost 90 degrees on that thermometer, and basically the whole headspace is about 90 degrees up here. It is definitely warm. I'm sweating in here. So all I've yet to do is get my fans up here, and I should be in good shape. And I'll bring a whole bunch of temperatures once I get everything situated the way I want it, and I'll do an overnight temp and all of that good stuff to kind of see how well this is working, because my goal is to basically get all of this going before a really cold night and burn it as hot as I can and get all of this heat sunk and basically just leave it so I do not have to come out again. And if I can get away with doing a system like that, I will be very happy with it. It's just going to be basically coming out, starting a real hot fire, maybe feeding it once or twice, and then letting it go for the night, and just carrying all of that heat from the thermal mass of all those bricks, the stove, and all of this water, and basically this steel tank too. So I want to see how fast the heat dissipates. With our second layer of poly, we've got good insulation value throughout the whole greenhouse and the airspace. I want to see what kind of temps we hold overnight, and all that extra energy is basically going to supplement where our Jean Pain is failing, because all of our solar systems are just simple solar. We don't have an inverter or a very good storage system. I only have so many batteries that I could find for free and use for this kind of stuff. We're basically just trying to do all of this as cheap as we possibly can and with good longevity to the results. We want to be able to use these systems over and over without just putting waste into the environment. I like to buy things that I can use for a good amount of time or for a lifetime, so those are considered investments by me. Every one of these little bits and bobs is an investment into the success of this greenhouse. All of the free stuff we acquire and all the work we put in is allowing us to be very successful. We've had a couple trays sprouting out here, decent plants. We've got what, tatsoi, reused little tags there, so I got doubles on each side. But we've got good sprouts. That geothermal holds the perfect temperatures for all those cold hardy crops, and it keeps the good airflow also. Where we don't have good airflow, I noticed that a few things are getting a little moldy and stuff where it's touching the ground too long and it doesn't have good enough airflow around it. There is a lot to learn when growing in winter time, especially growing in a very cold climate. We've had some pretty nasty weather, and it hasn't been too bad for the last couple weeks here, maybe 2 weeks or so. We got up to the 30s for a few days, and it was pretty nice dealing with 30 and 40 degree temperatures every once in a while if the sun came out. The sun just broke through the clouds, so we might be able to get some more heat added onto this greenhouse and sank in the floor, sank into all the water before it actually goes down, and we're left with just what heat we're producing from inside the greenhouse. So if anybody's got any questions on any of this, definitely drop it in the comments below. Any suggestions, any ideas. I think this is going to work very well. I know my copper isn't super tight on the actual stack. It was very hard to get it wrapped around there. I had to move all my bricks, and I didn't want it dead on because I didn't want to cool my stack too much and cause a negative or bad draw on the stack itself. I didn't want to cool the stack off so the smoke wouldn't want to rise out of it. That's why we had to have a really hot fire. As long as we've got a really hot fire, that will continue to roll out and we won't have any issues with bad draw. But for the most part, all those wood chips had burnt up over the last 45 minutes or so. So we had that thing about half full. So we got about 45 minutes to an hour of burn time, and we still got pieces of wood in there that are able to be reignited just by throwing dry kindling in or whatever. So we should be in good shape to operate like this. I got to add a few more systems and kind of tighten things up, but for the most part, all I got to do is get energy ran to my pumps and allow them to have their own energy source, because all I'm going to be doing is putting an on-off switch for our actual water heater here. So our John Payne runs 24/7, or as much power as it has throughout the day, and it always runs in cycles. And this is basically going to be an operating tool for when we actually burn a fire. So we're not going to run this unless we have a hot fire going, so we can thermally sink all of that. So basically the furnace and all of this heat sinking ability, all of this copper coil and the fittings and stuff are going to just be for those really cold nights. So if we've got a week or two at a time that we're going to be below 10 degrees or so, single digits or negatives, I will probably have enough stuff and material to continually burn those and get a really hot fire going every single night for 2 weeks or so. And then I'll have to grab and acquire more material from our pile and from around the yard and stuff. So I'll be able to burn this for the next couple weeks every single night for a couple hours before the sun goes down. So that's basically just the simple goal of it. Basically heat sink as much as we can before that sun goes down to hold the better temperatures overnight.